Adam, thank you very much for joining me today. It's really a delightful opportunity to have this moment to chat with you. How are you?
I'm really good. Lovely to see you.
You too. And I love the print/painting that's in your background. I was mentioning that earlier. It's really beautiful to have a splash of color and some creativity. So I want to start by asking you the question that I always open these conversations with. And if we're using the frame of a global human psyche, what do you imagine is going on in that global human psyche right now? Given that we're recording on the 14th of April, this will come out a bit later, but there is a lot going on at this point in time.
Yeah, it's a big, bold question to start with, but I think a really important one. The last couple of months, I think I've probably had more conversations around what is going on in the world right now, beyond all the macro political environment that we sit in, but more from a transformation point of view. And I think that's because we're sort of undergoing the biggest, I would say, and most fascinating transformation that we've ever seen and probably will experience in our careers. And one thing that I've latched onto, Natalie, was that, 6 months ago, everyone was like, you heard phrases like normalization or like, when are we returning to BAU? And I've been quite bold and said that I don't think there is such a thing as BAU anymore. I think it's sort of this transformation as usual. And what we're seeing out there is, and probably since the pandemic that really accelerated it, was the amount of change and transformation that is going on in business is one like we've never seen before. So you've got pace, you've got complexity, and you've got many things that are like hyper connected, which like exacerbates the complexity. And I would say sort of like as AI sort of integrates with our personal and professional lives, and we can talk about what that means. I think people are grappling with this pace of change.
Yeah.
We see in some of the LinkedIn data that people are unanimously excited and can see to a degree where the benefits will be. But there is one sort of standout sort of fact and statistic, which is that 2 out of 5 professionals, are anxious. And when you dig into that, it's not necessarily anxiety of what will be, it's the pace and the anxiety of keeping up. And I think that's sort of really sort of interesting that, what does that mean for people is like, they're going through this transformation where they're still trying to do their job in a conventional way, but technology has gone. Even in the last 12 months, we were talking 12 months ago, everybody was talking about the sort of the co-pilot, the technology that, is there and is shiny and sparkly to say, hey, I'm here, want some help, to very quickly an assistant-based world where, hey, I can take some of that off your plate, to even now the term agentic is, front and foremost, which is causing, again, anxiety for business leaders and for individuals around, job displacement, for example. So I think as it relates to human psyche, people are just generally pretty anxious. And I think you see two facets of individuals, if I really simplify it. One is, and I use this sort of phrase, some of the conversations I have is what's going to be left behind for humans.
Yeah.
But you see other individuals to say what's possible for humans.
Yeah.
And I think from a psyche point of view, I think we're at this sort of tension where people are choosing to sit in one frame of mind or the other. And it's really interesting of both being relatively unknown. Yeah. But I think it's a sort of psychological makeup of like how people are choosing to, sit in this moment right now.
It's fascinating hearing that kind of, it's two faces on a coin, the sort of what's possible and what's left.
Yeah.
And I think sitting beneath that, I think, is another question, which is, if everything can be automated at a certain point and the technology gets good enough and, issues with hallucination get resolved, which at some point they will, I'm sure at some point, even if it's, using different models or what have you, then if we can outsource human productivity to machines, what constitutes a meaningful life? And then what are the things that we want to spend time on? even if they're replicable, which are the things that are going to be the most valuable, the most meaningful, the most joyful? And I think that's, in some ways, that's a much more helpful question, because then you can say, okay, well, when we're thinking about what's left and what's possible, what would be, in your wildest imaginings, the kind of future you would love to inhabit, where technology is just augmenting the things that make the world a more vibrant, exciting, dynamic, secure place? So and I think that's an interesting place to get to, especially when people are anxious and worried about, like you say, the pace of change, or, at the moment, AI is replacing, so AI tools and platforms might be replacing specific tasks, but what happens when you get teams of agents that can replace entire roles or entire teams of people, which is probably not impossible in the near-term future, although I do have some doubts about specifics. But yeah, I think the question to bring people out of anxiety is also, what would it look like if AI could support you in your life? Sorry, go on. Yeah.
But there's many things going on with that. So if you really take a high level view, the world has major shortages of skills and talent. Now, you could argue that in the Western world we have skill shortages, and there is talent in other places of the world. And I've come back from South Africa, and that's been very apparent. But that is an interesting thing if you look at, the inverse pyramid and triangle of aging populations. I sit on a board of, advocating for older workers. They're the only generation that's growing. So, one of the problem statement that is here today and is maybe hidden a little bit in the sort of economic situation is that we don't have enough people for work, and people are getting older. And so you can talk about, all the benefits of a better life and choices and the optimism, but fundamentally we need to be more productive. The scope of our roles has to expand, and it has to include a greater emphasis of technology. And then you touched on something which I really like. AI is not taking your job; it's taking your tasks. Now, some jobs will be eliminated, but in every revolution that we've had, jobs have been displaced and new jobs have been created. And we see many of the top skills in our fastest growing skills weren't here, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's something that we've dealt with. And then I love the fact that I think if we were all honest and stopped looking at our job title and our job spec and started looking at our job in a collection of skills and tasks, I don't know many people that would say they enjoy 100% of the tasks they do.
Yeah, for sure. Excel spreadsheets spring to mind.
Which is, there's always a part of your day or week or month where you would say, it's not the bit that gets me out of bed. It's part of the job.
Yeah, but that's the bit, like the things that require meticulously going through, like for instance, accounting stuff. Some people love it. My brain just doesn't like it. Or like, or newsletter, whatever it might be, or editing of these sorts of conversations. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that I would love it if AI would do the heavy lifting, but I don't think we're there quite yet. I haven't found any tools that convincingly do the job reliably enough. But I'm very happy to be challenged. If you came back and you're like, well, Nat, try this. I'm like, yes, amazing.
Well, we can talk about that, but I think that is the question is, so many people at the moment are, we're in, you could argue we're in this hype cycle. So
yeah.
I was around in my career when it was the .com, so everything was .com.
Yeah.
Now everything is like powered by AI or agents. You only have to watch a TV program and there's some new technology platform that says, hey, I can take all this stuff away. But really, the place to start is, what do I not enjoy doing? Because I'm not of the belief that people are not good at stuff. I believe you can be good at most things if you put your mind to it.
Yeah.
But I sit probably quite similar to you. I'm high on creativity. So anything that is repetitive, that is non-human interactive, that takes up 3-4 hours of my week, it doesn't get prioritized. And I would then respond to someone of like, it's part of the job.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting bit, because those are the bits that you can, with time, and you have to create time to find these tools,
Yeah.
and that will become a lot easier, and they will get
Yeah.
better, and they will become more equipped in things like tonality to be really, really effective. But, if you think about, I think a lot about like content, for example. I was reading an article the other day that every executive and CEO has to be like a really strong on like social brand and purpose. But one of the most time-consuming things is the blank page syndrome, where
Totally.
but if you can have something that is 85% good enough,
Yeah.
it's much easier to wordsmith on something than it
Yeah.
is to mentally, and maybe it's just me, but mentally start with a blank canvas. I find that incredibly difficult, and I have to be in a certain like mindset or under a certain amount of pressure to know I just need to
Yes.
get
The
to start.
deadline.
It's often the deadline,
Yeah.
I know that I'm super creative in those moments,
Yeah.
but I'm probably not the most effective, and maybe somebody else needs something quicker than I choose to deliver that.
Yeah, but there's so many elements there that I think are really interesting. So there's some fascinating research that's starting to come out now around ways in which AI generated content in certain contexts impacts the way it's received by the person reading or consuming it. And so there's one study that came out that's fascinating, talking about the AI authorship effect, and it was saying that for specific, it was a team of researchers that were measuring the emotional response of people who are reading a particular kind of piece of content, and for stuff which was an emotional message, um, written and produced by AI, people had a heightened level of moral disgust, which is fascinating, versus when that AI was being used to serve facts and convey information, where actually people rated it really positively. And so there are these weird quirks of human, I don't think they're necessarily weird, but quirks of human psychology as to how we respond to AI generated content at this stage in the game, because obviously you could probably at some point train an AI. I'm thinking about Data from Star Trek here, where they have a personality, they have their own tone of voice, and it doesn't homogenize and flatten all of the content that it produces because the platform is taking from a specific set of training data, whatever. But one of the biggest issues, well, that's one of them, is the moral disgust from the AI authorship effect when you're using AI to create emotional messages, like you might in marketing and advertising. And the second one was around the flattening of tone. So the fact
Mm-hmm.
that, and I've noticed this on many social platforms, and including on LinkedIn, I can really tell when someone that I follow has actually taken the time to craft a really well written piece, because you hear the inflections in the way that it's written. And I'm curious, actually, maybe now's a good time to ask about that. When there is so much content that people are generating, and it can be quite overwhelming to feel like we're keeping up, how do we not fall prey to this kind of context in which people feel they need to be visible, they feel they need to create, they outsource too much to AI, as opposed to kind of using it as a sparring partner, doing some of the work, and then you actually bring your own voice and ideas into it. And then you end up with a flooding of information that people get overwhelmed by, and then they start to disengage. Because I think that's also a moment in time. I think we're going to find better ways to use these tools. You mentioned the hype cycle, and there are, rhythms of use, improper use, better use, seeing what works, what doesn't. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the points you raised in that is a good one. And I think it leads back to transparency. So,
Mm,
I speak to many businesses, and they, if I think about like an AI maturity model of, whether people are skeptical, they're curious, they're experimenting, they're scaling or full adopting. The people that tend to sort of sit, and there are many that sit in that sort of skeptical, their default is, I can spot an AI generated message a mile away. And
mm.
and my response back to that is,
Can you?
well, many that is, can you? For how long? And
Yeah.
does it matter? And I
Mm,
think that leads back to where you are in that human transaction. And do you feel in that moment of that human interaction that you need that human connectivity? So I'll give you a good
mm,
example that's non-related to my industry, but um, I'm quite happy dealing with AI and a chatbot or some kind of digital agent in banking.
Yeah.
But they disclose it and it's more efficient. I get a
Yeah.
quick response and I get to an outcome because I don't really feel like I'm making any kind of, I'm transacting as opposed to making any kind of like decision. But maybe if I want to change my mortgage provider or I want to make a financial decision that has an impact on my life, I maybe want the combination of that data, but I also want that EQ and that empathy or whatever it is in that time. So if I think about, we look at this a lot on our platform. I think the data says it all. People are responding to AI generated outreach significantly higher and within
Are
a much
they?
shorter, within
Oh,
a
that's
much shorter time.
fascinating.
But maybe that when you think about job searching, maybe in the first instance, I don't want to be sold. I just want information. I want to
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
where's the opportunity, what's the wage, what's the company, and I can do my own research around that. But maybe I don't want to be muddled by the human complexity that can come with persuasion and all of this. But maybe there's a moment I want to lean in and I can be nurtured through. So I think that sort of leads to the sort of that sort of tension of when is the right place and when
Yeah.
is not. And I think that's personal as well. So personalization is going to be huge. But I do agree on this sort of lack of authenticity piece because you will see content overload, you will see that lack of authenticity, you will see to some degree like algorithmic bias and these sort of echo chambers that will lead to disengagement. And in a more negative place, you will see that potential reduced value of that human creativity. And I definitely think we are there right now. But your question was, how do you reduce that? Well, for me, I view technology as an enabler. So it's like my superpower or my supercharger. So as long as you're encouraging that sort of blend of AI assisted and human added value
Yeah.
to, let's pick on content creation, I'm happy with that because I don't like the blank sheet of paper, but I'm never going to post something that doesn't have my tonality. It's not going to sound like me. It's not going to have, things like storytelling. It's not going to have personal experience in there. Only I can give that. And I think my biggest advice is if you are going to want to stand out, you have to bring your human self. And the best way to do that is to challenge yourself is bring components to that content or conversation that AI can't replicate. And those are the stories, they are the human experiences, I think community, you can nurture communities on content quite
Yeah.
easily. And I think that's where people are being super successful. And I think I got told this story, I don't know if I've ever told this to you before. And it may be a very simplistic story to somebody with your technological knowledge, but
I don't know about that.
and a few people, it's resonated when I've told people because I sit also speaking to a lot of marketeers and they're like, well, if everyone has access to the same, surely everything will be the same. And I'm like, maybe in the short term, but when people become adaptive to that, then the bar is going to be raised. I got to speak to this fascinating professor. He was what he said to me specifically was that, hey Adam, I'm over 70. I run all the AI at one of the colleges in the AI sort of content and the educational programs at one of the leading colleges in the US. And he said, look, I've been here before. And you can't have been here before. He went, well, in academia, we saw the introduction of the calculator, which, by the way, was a tool. And he said there was uproar. People said it's cheating. Everyone's going to have the same access. We're going to lose the ability to understand foundational maths. And if everybody has the same access to everything, how do you know who's good and who's not? And what you saw over time was adaptation to that, which now, I have a 11-year-old son. he's phenomenal at his times table and foundational maths because there's components where he's taught that, but also he started coding at 6 at school,
Wow.
and he's making games, and he's all his hope, to watch him do language homework that is all interactive. So I had Tricolor book, and that was it, and I
Yeah.
practiced in the classroom. He's doing
Yeah.
all his homework with, voice work. He's doing speech written, and it's adapting to where he is, and it's making it iteratively harder. And I think that goes back to sort of the calculator. What the calculator actually raised the bar, but
Mm.
there was a point then you could argue that AI might not have been here if it wasn't for the calculator, because people have been exploring a lot further, I would say sophisticated models.
Yeah.
And I see when I think, going back to what we were talking about with content, I think that's exactly the same. The bar
Mm.
will raise, and then people that are creative and they can tell stories and they understand the brilliant balance of technology enablement to be effective, but then the blend of the human story with that and the creativity, that's an exciting place to be, because actually it's going to take us to things that we've not even thought were possible. And I think in the
Mm.
last 12 months, all the tools that I've played with, and we can talk about that, I wouldn't have done anything like that, because it would have required a production studio, it would have required high cost. And you know that's really exciting for a leveler across the working world, that
Mm.
a one person business can compete now, because they can be super creative and really efficient and low cost.
So you're already like weaving in nicely some of the other questions I had for you. One of which is about which are the tools and platforms that you're most excited to be using, and then also the human skills, of which you've mentioned some that we need to be focusing on to enable us to thrive in terms of our future careers and to adapt as new tools and platforms come out. So maybe let's start with the tools that you
Oh my
have
God, there are
most
so many.
enjoyed.
I'll
Maybe
try and like,
give us your top five.
so I think everyone is like, I think I sit in, well, I think having a curious mindset is
Yeah.
is brilliant right now. And I think it's about, I don't think I've had so much fun in my career in terms of like self-paced learning.
Mm.
It doesn't require a government or a company necessarily to define my learning path. I think learning now can be self-paced. You can follow your own curiosity and you
Yeah.
can go at your own pace. And I think that's really important because, and we can talk about this later, but we are seeing that self-pacing is really important because, women, for example, are disproportionately lower adopters on AI.
Hmm.
We see
Oh,
that,
interesting.
and that is a lot to do with social burden and burnout, and also are companies doing enough to create the space for self-paced learning. So if I think about some of the things I'm playing with, I think it's easy to follow the shiny thing that's over here that's new this week. But
Mm.
I think there's one encouragement to anyone that's listening to this is some of the main staple type tools are getting better and better. And
Hmm.
so things like Copilot, for example, and I'm not just saying that because I work for Microsoft, but let's not get away from the fact Microsoft is significantly investing in AI, wants to be the leader in that space. So, only a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure everyone on this, watching this would say, well, I use transcript and, actions off the back of it. But,
Yeah.
like notes has appeared now, and, it's doing all your action points. So that's evolving. The stuff that you can do within Word as opposed to Teams
Mm.
is really, really strong. Preparation for customer meetings, because if you
Hmm.
open Copilot into your enterprise architecture and your data set, as a new person coming into a role, you can just say, I'm going on X client meeting. Can you give me a summary of everything that's gone on? And whatever you need, like it's all there. And so I think there's some internal like resource repository
Yeah.
technology, which is really, and Glean is a really good example of that as well. I think it's transforming, from all these links and intranets that you had in companies, find anything at any time. Something like Glean is super helpful. I
Wow.
think then in terms of running a sales business, you can't be everywhere with everyone
All at
at
once.
every moment. So there's some brilliant technology within like Gong. So Gong basically will, listen to the calls, and it will not only, the past you used to have to listen to every call and you could then sort of do the coaching, which is super important. But now off the back of Gong, you can get like the intelligence through AI on like, development structures. It can give you customer sentiment analysis. It's like, that's fantastic. That's from a customer point of view. And then I think I do a huge amount of conferences, keynotes, and on the one hand, I have an ambition to take all of that privilege that I have to speak to thousands of people a year and be in all those conversations, which I think is really where the magic sits in trying to grow a business and understand your customers. But you can't always do that, rather than, coming back from a conference in the US and then it takes you 3 weeks to record something and then it's 60 minutes for someone to listen to. I've been doing two things. One is I use something called Otter AI, so I just transcript. So I think I was in Arizona earlier this year. I think I had nearly 40 different customer interactions. They could have been roundtables, keynotes, and I literally just voice noted everything off the back of that, integrated into one transcript. And then I did do two things. So you could use the AI within that, or you could put it into Copilot or ChatGPT to create. Would have to be enterprise ChatGPT for safety. But I would use Copilot. And then I did two things. One was I created a one-page summary of all the themes, the actions, and I was very clear in the prompt of who it was going to, internal teams. And then I used Notebook LM, Google Notebook LM, and just asked in Copilot to create a webinar script, which I prompted a few times. And then, so the reason I tell you that, Natalie, was after, I think literally when I landed, I had a one pager and a transcript. So I created the webinar, and that was with the team within less than 48 hours, which firstly was, they all fell off their chair. The second thing was I was able to give that communication. So you could have the transcript, I could create a presentation, I created a one pager, and other people could listen to it on the tube in 22 minutes. Now, was it perfect? No. But the feedback was I didn't mind the fact that it sounded a little bit agentic and it was a little bit, overly manipulated in terms of like, there was a question and endorsement, and it wasn't as a human conversation would flow. But the feedback was it was way good enough. And the most important thing was I got your insights within 48 hours rather than waiting a month after, because of the busyness of business kind of takes you out of business.
Yeah.
So those are things. And then maybe just in terms of like aggregation of resource, I think Perplexity, like keeping up to date with news, is really cool. Things like Claude for like anything, like, because I'm visual and I'm a real perfectionist when it comes to PowerPoint. And I can't tell you the amount of weeks I've probably now, I would say, lost from creating these beautiful presentations that I value like a piece of art, that others were like, whatever. But the fact you can use things like, Gamma for that, or you can use things like HeyGen for like avatar videos if you can't be in the room. So I can't make a lot of events that I'm asked to attend, certainly internally if I'm out with customers in industry. And so maybe the team love the fact that you're being creative and that you feels like you're kind of in the room when you're not in the room, rather than a static video recording. So I think there's so many things. I'm really excited / a bit scared of things like Google or Microsoft sort of like personalized AI companions, because, well, firstly, some of these require more time than playing with a Perplexity, for example. They're pretty intuitive. They're low code. They're low front end on, and they work. And then the value creation comes in of use over time, whereas
Yeah.
something like, an assistant or an agent, I'd have to trawl back through presentations, videos, um, life's work of business plans and mission statements and personal purpose statements. And people are doing that and
Yeah.
finding it really effective. And yeah, but that's a little bit more unknown for me, but I'm definitely playing. And I think the most important thing that I would say to anyone is it's about play. It's about, what I always go back to, and I'm not just giving you a list of things that are shiny. What I tend to do, Natalie, is go, let's look at my day, week, month, quarter. What are the areas that I have the least energy for, that take the most time and are not related to decision making, but to like repetitive task and transaction.
Yeah.
And then I look for technology that can help me make me more efficient, and doing that with people. So my finance business partner, I said, look, we spend 4 hours a week prepping for a forecast call into all these technology sources, and we're checking this dashboard, that what, da 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 da. So we just build an agent for that, so that when we have, and maybe we still have 3 hours together, but
Yeah.
let's use our critical thinking skills and analytical skills to take that data and not actually be using it in terms of like study, and actually use that in terms of like review,
Yeah.
predictions, trends, more strategic
Mm.
work. And that's kind of how I've thought about it. But I do know that so many companies or so many people in business are being targeted and hounded on the next silver bullet. But
Hmm.
actually, that's not really, in my view, the way to do it. It's really to work out your working pattern and your workflow, and then work out where there are problems and opportunities to capture, and then look for the technology for that
Yeah.
and play. And there'll be three, four, five, and don't get wedded to one. Just and watch how some of them iterate as well.
I really love that you're starting from the quite a human-centered perspective, which is where am I at? Where do I need to be? What are the pain points? Depending on what my priorities are, how can I actually outsource some of the stuff which is sucking up valuable time that I could be spending better elsewhere? And so some of the human skills that I think you've already mentioned quite a few. So the creativity, the curiosity,
Yeah.
bringing this stance of play to the ways in which we might try out these different technologies and not get wedded to one. Is there anything else that you think people need to be aware of in terms of being able to adapt
Yeah,
to a changing landscape?
I was just thinking about some of the skills. I think a lot of it you can summarize in. So the brilliance of people will be in the human and strategic. You
Okay.
know, for me, that's what it is. So it won't be any surprise to you that. Well, there was before I give you the reveal. Um, I think what's been really interesting when you look at the world in the World Economic Forum,
Mhm.
probably 3 to 5 years ago, was like everything is STEM. Everything has to
Yeah.
be, like STEM skills. We've got to really think about educational reform to build STEM skills. I don't know whether this is more a pattern and a signal that I notice, but when you watch and speak to people that went to the World Economic Forum this year, there was an interesting trend, which was it was less about that,
Hmm.
Natalie. It was more about if you are in a what I would call a soft skill role,
Yeah.
you need to become, like very simplistically, you need to become more technical. And if you are in I would say, a hard skill role, you need to become more soft skill and
Yeah.
human centric, which I thought was really interesting. So, you could look at all of our data that would tell you that skills that are going to be required and are in high demand right now are all soft skill
Hmm.
orientated. However, so those would be like communication, they would be critical thinking, they would be, in my world of a sales organization, empathy, persuasion, everything that is that sort of human-orientated conversation.
Yeah.
So my son asked me, he's just done his 11 plus. He said, like, he said, Papa, you're in jobs and career stuff. What beyond me learning all of this stuff at school, what skill am I going to need to get a job? And I just said, really good human conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that is definitely required. And you can see, even in things like just phone skills, telephone skills, and phone conversations have gone up like 13x on the platform.
Wow.
It's just incredible, that sort of rise that we've seen. But fundamentally, they're all related to the bucket of EQ. We need to really factor and nurture that EQ component. Whilst, my role, as you can see with all my play, what I'm trying to do is become more technical. Now,
Yeah.
I don't have to be a coder, but I could be if I want to. I can build my own agent. It's not as complex as you think it is. But equally, if I'm actually a coder now sitting in Utah or Silicon Valley, some of the stuff that was very reliant only on me can be done. Now you need a human loop in that, and we can talk about that. But I need to be able to take that technical work and be more conversant into the business strategy. So that's definitely what we're seeing, is that everything that is, if you draw a quadrant of sort of like transactional, everything that is and has been and will be disrupted is that effectively repetitive transactional task. And then on the top right quadrant, you have this human and strategic. Now, one could argue that it's never say never, but I think that might be down to where this conversation is around our choice to define where we want to play and where we want to effectively delegate to technology.
So thinking about some of the biggest mistakes that business leaders might make, what are the trends that you're seeing there? Are there specific errors that people make, maybe rushing in too quickly or not sort of picking up quickly enough, or without naming any names, I don't want to get you into trouble?
I think there are a number of like mistakes.
Yeah.
I think one is, and probably the most important one, I think, and we're going to say AI, but what I mean is really emerging tech. I think definitions, and we've talked about this offline a lot. I think a lot of the people making significant decisions around technology strategy are probably the ones in most cases that have the highest learning and adoption curve. Because I'm certainly not the tablet generation, and my son is instinctively tech, coding at 6. So it's second nature to him. So within that responsibility and pressure, what you tend to find is, because I don't necessarily understand it to the level that I need, because it is significantly impactful for many different reasons that we can talk about, I'll either close it down or I will, and that's a problem, because I think somewhere in the region of 70, it might be between 76 and 78% of people are bringing their own AI to work. So that's naive, right? But I think there's a misunderstanding of AI's role, that it's not the silver bullet or the magic solution. So some people are overestimating, but equally then some are underestimating the transformative potential. And I think that is a message to anyone that's running a business, or having to make a responsible decision on the use of AI within a company, is you really need to understand at a very high technical degree what AI's capability is. And by the way, it's not an easy thing to decide what is, whether you're overestimating or underestimating. And we'll talk about why and how people get there. I think the other area that I'm definitely seeing is, and it's probably not the most exciting reveal, but I think it's poor data strategy and governance. I think what you're seeing is, if you simplify technology, you're seeing people understand that they need to move. We've moved away from data centers to cloud to sort of tech stacks. Tech stacks are really not what AI is about. It's about ecosystems. But the turmoil you have within certainly many big global businesses, Natalie, is that technology and AI is so readily available because of the SaaS model. It's low cost, and you and I can solve a million different problems and play on all these different things. But unless that data integrates into the ecosystem, AI cannot, it could be either unreliable, untapped, or simply fail. And obviously, then you need to have a governance structure around that. I would say the final two areas that I think are mistakes are mishandling the workforce strategy of the business. So I had a really interesting podcast the other week actually with someone that was a change expert, and he said, "Oh, leaders are very good at change," and I said, "I'm not sure I agree." I said, "I think leaders are more exposed to change, and maybe more amenable, but doesn't mean they're particularly good at running change." So you think about this being a change motion. How do you take the whole workforce with you?
Yeah.
And there's 5 generations in the workforce. You've now got workforces spread all over the world. You've got hybrid, you've got in office, you've got fully remote. Your workforce is infinitely more complicated, all requiring different communication channels, different value propositions, driven by different purposes. So if you're not reskilling or involving your employees, none of this is going to take shape anyway.
Yeah.
So I talk a lot, and probably an area that I didn't mention in the skills. For me, one of the most important things that I'm driving in my business right now is it's my responsibility to ensure that we become more AI fluent and more data literate as a business.
Yeah.
And that is a really, really big challenge, because if you've got people that are nervous or skeptical, you're going to have all of those AI maturity in your business. You have to prioritize that, but you have to build an environment where you raise all ships within that, because your technology won't be effective. And as we've said in the past together, that, the biggest threat to your role, if you think about the anxiety of displacement, is not technology, it's the human enabled by technology. So that's our investment in our job equity over time. And I think that the final thing that I think is really important, and I will repeat what I've already said before, is rushing in without clear use cases.
Yeah, totally.
It's which is kind of a bit contradictory, because I'm saying go play.
Yeah.
But I think what you heard me say, and I want to underscore it, is I am playing like crazy, and I'd love to do more, but I am prioritizing time. So I block out specific parts of my week where I'm just learning, because it's going to help me be more effective. But if you just go learn, you could just read and get nothing done. And there's so many different opinions out there, and you could spend weeks and months even finding out, what is fresh and hot, and it's always going to be outdated. So working out as a business, and I see some companies do this really well. They basically built AI playgrounds. Playground, in the very spirit, is in a park. If you think about a playground, it's fun, it's experimental, it's built on development, and you are coaching new individuals to build confidence, courage, and resourcefulness. But it's safe, right? You've got your parameters around that. So the parameters being, make sure your company has protected and enterprise safe environments for experimentation. Bring in the digital natives. it goes back to my view of like involvement and bring in the decision makers. So, bring in, the parents, but put in problems. Say, what's the biggest thing that's a problem to our business right now? And what do we think is the biggest opportunity?
Yeah.
Then you've got use cases, because when you've got a use case, you're going to be able to understand, and it's got to be backed by data. So you need to know where you're starting, and you need to see where you could go with it. And you need to be clear on what you're trying to achieve. And we're very much in the era of AI being all around productivity, efficiency optimization. But for me, I'm all about seeing around corners. Like, we won't be talking about that in 18 months, 2 years. It will be around, with all this efficiency gained, businesses will have a decision of three avenues. One will be labor cost reduction.
Yeah.
The other will be do more with the same. Or the other will be we have the opportunity to do deeper work. So if I get, we can already see in many, in the world I live in recruitment businesses, and we're at the infancy stage of what could be, we are saving already a day a week back.
Wow.
So what do you do with that day? Well, for me, I can do deep work. And now I don't really know what deep work is. I do know it's more human-centric and more strategic, but that's a lovely place to be in, to define what deep work is. But that's where I'm encouraging businesses a lot, is like, I get the fact that you're in a macro pressurized, economically pressured environment right now.
Yeah.
So it is around productivity, but don't be under any illusion that, you are going to have small businesses that can be more competitive and agile than you. So how do you evolve your value proposition into this human, strategic, and deeper work? Because that is where your longevity, your sustainability, and your value will come from. But you need to balance that with the tension of that you need to deliver today and become more efficient and optimized. And that's really where businesses are at.
Yeah. So it's taking a much more, again, you mentioned critical thinking earlier, so a more balanced, strategic, analytical perspective on actually where you want to go, and then how technology can be used in service to that in terms of how you roll it out as well. Now, there's something that I do want to ask you. I've asked several different folks this already, and I'm very curious about your perspective, especially because you spend so much time in conversation with people, getting direct insights about some of this research. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. So quite a bit of the recent research that I've looked at in terms of cognition, human behavior, psychology, which is sort of my stomping ground, I found that there's some unintended consequences about over-reliance on AI in particular cases. So things like the blunting of specific cognitive skills, like problem solving being undermined, critical thinking, and in general, if we're thinking not just about AI, but increased screen time, things like higher incidence of reported ADHD and depression being connected to overwhelm of having to keep up with everything, including, for instance, social media. So it's not all connected with productivity tools. And so we know that AI is only going to get hopefully better and more useful and more ubiquitous. Are there standards of best practice? I think probably here I'm thinking more, because you've covered quite a lot of the business case here, but in terms of personal hygiene psychologically when it comes to using AI. So what are some of the ways that you would suggest we can use AI to augment our performance without undermining our capabilities? I'm thinking here of what you said with the calculator. You can use it, but your son's still learning his times table. So it's not that you're saying you can't use a calculator, but you have to understand the basic principles before you outsource things. So are you finding a similar, what are you finding there that's important for us to kind of stay aware of?
Well, I think it's one of the most important societal conversations going on right now. You have to watch Netflix to realize that. I don't think this is about AI. I think per se this is around the blend of tech and touch, as I call it, or this sort of human and technology. What is the right balance? And technology is addictive, right? Anyone that's got kids in their family life, I'm sure we've got some access to small people. Technology is clever, right? It is addictive for them, and us. Let's not be naive. We are all, you look at anything that relates to human wellness and energy and blue light and all the rules
Yeah.
and all the tips that come out are all around, 3-2-1. So reducing your technology, weaning you off before bedtime for better sleep,
Yeah.
Now, I think the challenge is that things are moving so fast that, as much as I would say that, regulation and industry standards have to be guiding this blend here, we do know that regulation and policy just takes time.
Yeah.
So I think one of the most important things businesses need to do, which again I'll think about to sort of parenting, because AI adoption is going on quicker in our personal lives than business. What are we trying to do in a domestic environment? We put guide rails, don't we? We put guide rails of screen time, adoption, and we need to balance that with fresh air and play and be with your friends and all of those important things. I think that the thing that we need to think about is, so every company needs to have their own responsible AI strategy. They need to have principles. I think businesses have a huge responsibility into regulatory and policy standard establishment, because it's important. I think not just waiting for regulation to come through. Businesses need to be, at the table and in that conversation. If I think about businesses that are effective in this, and I work with a number of businesses that are, setting up like with other companies, not just their own, like ethics boards. They are thinking, they have a fundamental like stance, which is AI should support decision making, not replace it. They have to ensure that users understand how it works and the consequences and the benefits. Again, thinking about me and my son, no point just saying no or 3 hours a day or whatever it is. It's so actually, this could be really good for you here, here, and here, but there's some dangers here, here, here. So it's about and explaining not just the what, the why, and how things work. So it's then about finding, for me, balance between where technology plays more effectively and where humans complement and can be creative and all the things we talked about. I do think there's a big focus on screen time management, but I don't think that's just an AI thing.
That's definitely more of a general societal thing.
And also working from home has not helped that. We see in all our, the Microsoft reports, people are working longer. They're on their screens more. Now, one could debate whether we're just busier or productive, but we're multitasking. We're thinking about things, boundaries. I love going into the office and people go, "Are you crazy?" And I'm like, well, no, because it provides.
You can also leave it, and you leave it behind.
It provides me structural boundaries. So
that's it. You're not
when I leave and get the tube in the morning, feel like I'm weaning myself into work. I'm familiarizing myself with it, preparation. I'm not going straight into that conversation on the way home. I'm all the things that I never got to do in a meeting, because I have a belief that I don't want to bring people into the office to sit on Zoom calls. I want to, human connection is worth the commute, right? So people come in for friendship and connection. So all the things that we define as work, like emails and follow-ups, yes, AI can improve that, but ultimately that is my structural sort of boundaries. So it's about that reduces screen time to a degree. So I think that's fundamentally, it's a societal problem, and I think one conversation that is going to run and run. But I think it's about guide rails or guardrails. I think it's about having principles in there and having a belief of where AI and technology can drive efficiency, quality, optimization. But where can we, with all that time back, how can we do that deeper work? Which I'm in love with that statement, because I think that is all the things I love about what this can bring, which is I get the choice to do the things that I'm going to enjoy doing and I'm good at. and I'm good at them because I'm passionate about them,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to do a better job because it stimulates me. And I'm going to feel more fulfilled because I'm not anchored by the things that I have to do that I'm not as good at or I don't like and invest the time and I don't prioritize.
Yeah.
That makes me a
Although,
much more effective professional.
yes, and there is definitely something to be said for, and I hate that I'm saying this, but for things that we don't enjoy. Like, I really don't like exercising. And yet, since February, I've made myself a commitment. I've got a personal trainer now, and I'm going twice a week, and then Pilates, a brutal Pilates once a week. So training 3 times a week, and I've hated it and hated it and hated it and hated it until literally last week, where suddenly I was looking forward to it. And the reason was because I'm starting to feel stronger. I can see the muscles. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, there's still, room for improvement. But there is something about also not suffering for the sake of suffering. I think that's really unhelpful, but being able to persevere with things that we don't enjoy so much. So I think that's where the delicate balance comes in. But I mean, that's there's so many other questions I want to ask you before we end the conversation, and we're coming to the close. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about human in the loop, and I'm curious about your thoughts given the rise of agentic AI, which is interesting. And also, I mean, agentic AI has been around for a while. We just haven't called it that, like recommendation engines or personalized marketing. Some of these systems already kind of have that same capacity. But do you think that where we are currently, in specific instances, AI tools should be allowed to make autonomous decisions without human oversight and intervention?
I think being transparent, I think where we are, no. Um, I think it's very hard to say yes or no because
Mm.
I think you can only make that statement based on what you know today. And at the moment, if you think about anything that is near something of consequence, that has to be protected. So
Yeah.
at the moment, you can see AI is going to give you benefits like increased efficiency. You will see reduced error rate, and you're seeing more adaptability and learning. So there is a benefit, but equally there is many risks that come with that, Natalie. So you've got like lack of accountability, you've got this like bias and unintended consequences, you've got security threats, you've got job displacements. There is too much at stake, in my view, at the
Mm.
moment, to to be in that conversation. But you don't know, over time whether this accountability is going to be resolved. You don't know with something that's so brilliant, I mean, I love so many things about where we are technologically, but on the downside of that, I think what you're seeing is it's a lot easier to fake what you know.
Yeah, it's true.
Um, so that's a challenge. So for me at the moment, AI should augment, not replace, and we need to see an acceleration of this, policy making guardrails. Businesses need to have their own principles.
Mm.
I like what you challenged and said around that it shouldn't be, and it's sort of an excuse not to do some of the hard work as well. But I think you know, I think that's also like a principle of the business to decide,
Mm.
but you do need to learn that, to my son, you do need to eat your vegetables, right?
Yeah.
I just know it's better for you, and that's a company
Yeah.
decision that's important for us. But I think at the moment it's so important that as we are experimenting and even moving into like a scaled world, you have to have these checks and balances. You have to have these human in the loop systems. I'm really passionate and advocating for this sort of transparency. I think
Mm-hmm.
people need to know what they're engaging with. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not adverse to speaking to or interacting with a chatbot in any way, shape, or form.
Mm.
But I've spoken to customers where they've done that and they haven't been explicit in that, and then people are
Right.
then go, I'm skeptical. it's like, I think we've seen this a little bit in the call center model where, people want to speak to someone and they're like, they're offshore, and that's brilliant. It's a brilliant model offshore, but just say you're offshore, right? When
Yeah.
people find that there is vagueness,
Yeah.
then they have caution and distrust. And we've seen companies that have just changed the model and say, you are dealing, we have this chatbot and they are interacting with you because they are trying to update your information. And people stay longer and they
Interesting.
comply.
Yeah.
So I think transparency and explainability, but people, I think, are hesitant to do that. And I think finally, this sort of, we have to see this ethical AI governance in place.
Yeah.
And that's complicated, right?
That is
Really
complicated. And that was one of my questions. I think we're running close to time. So I'm gonna finish with one before, well, there's like the one that's specific to this one before closing with the regular question. So with all of the trends that you're seeing unfold and all of the staple tools that you're using now and you're seeing them grow in terms of their potential application, sort of briefly, what do you feel as Adam Hawkins, what are you most excited about in terms of where AI could go, and what are your concerns in terms of the greatest risks?
Well, I mean, that's a huge question.
Should have started there, huh?
I think so many things are possible and there's so much promise because, I think technology is going to, what I get excited about from a business point of view is I think technology is a leveler. What you're seeing now, if you didn't have X amount of resource and structural components and you weren't in this, other people couldn't compete with you. And I didn't think that was necessarily a fair playing field. What is exciting now is that, and you may already know whether this exists, but I think you're going to see the first $1 billion, €1 billion, £1 billion single person business. Because what you're going to see is that they're going to have more agility. And I was only speaking to a business in California a couple of weeks ago, and they're now up to nearly 300 customers, and they've got 5 fractional employees, fractional being the new term for contract employees, and 32 agents working in a non-decision oriented part of a recruitment business. And I was like, that is really cool that you can scale your business to that degree. Then you go and speak to a big customer and go like, we want to experiment, we want to be agile. But because we've been built in hierarchy and decision structures and the consequence of getting it wrong are huge, everything has to go through a governance board. And I can't be as nimble and agile as this business that actually is now supercharged.
Yeah.
So I think from a business point of view, that's exciting, caveat with all the risks which I'll come on to. But I think from a humanity point of view, how can you not be excited about the potential? You've got medical breakthroughs. I always tell the story that people in the past, would you, if you just had a doctor, you wanted the best doctor, because why were they the best doctor if you had, unfortunately, like a very rare illness? Well, if they'd been to some conference somewhere and they come across like someone else in their network, well, access to all sorts of research is going to be there. You could argue that you want the doctor for patient care, but statistically, it's actually the nurse that's better. So maybe, medical advancements and breakthroughs come with like amazing nursing and technology. I think there's climate solutions. That's one of the biggest threats to humanity is climate. You've got something very near and dear to my heart, which is, people are disproportionately hired. It's done on, who you know and what university you went to or college you went to. AI is going to open the playing field. Your talent pool can 10x in a more inclusive way if you use technology and AI, because it's looking at skills and potential. That's phenomenally exciting. I think being a creative person, yes, I can be more productive, but I think you can see my energy go to fact, look at all the things I'm playing with, because I can really be creative and not dependent upon necessarily bigger budgets and teams to do that. And then I think finally you've got, if you're going to have medical and climate, you're going to have like scientific discoveries as well. So that's exciting. But I am nervous, as we've talked about, which is, this is with every phenomenally exciting transformation, whilst we're figuring it out, and even when we figure it out, everything comes with a downside or a concern or something that we just need to be very diligent around, and that is bias and ethical concerns. I talked about job displacement, this misinformation and manipulation. You've given me a lot of great books to read, and as equally as they're exciting and like, wow, equally it's holy moly, that is worrying, because as I said, it's a lot easier to fake what you know, and that's an understatement of what is there. You've got security threats as a result of that. And I think it's humans' responsibility to ensure that there's not a loss of human agency.
Yeah, totally.
And I think as much as things are moving really fast, you always need to go slow to go fast. And I think if there's one thing that businesses and governments and policymakers, regulators, and us as humans have to be very, very principled and mindful of, is that it's our responsibility to ensure that we don't lose human agency.
Wonderful. That is an amazing place to land this conversation. So, where are the places for people to find you if they want to hear some of these fabulous keynotes or learn more about your insights about where we're going and what to watch for?
Well, it wouldn't surprise you, on LinkedIn. So.
Well, Adam, what a pleasure. It's been very interesting. I've taken a bunch of notes. I'm going to include in the show notes the tools that you listed. And it's been really insightful talking to you as always. Thank you so much.